You know, we've got a war in Europe, we've got NATO considering how they're getting involved, and Germany doing their best but having some of their hands tied because of a dependency on Russian oil and gas. Who could have foresaw that coming? Donald Trump, of course.
But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened.
You got to say, whatever you think of Donald Trump, he spoke a lot of sense there. Jonathan Steele, I mean, there is so much to unpick on the latest goings-on in Ukraine. I mean, where do we even begin? We've got more and more money, more and more weapons, more and more conversation about weaning ourselves, well, not ourselves, Germany, more to the point, off Russian oil and gas. And, you know, you've got Finland, for example, talking about submitting membership, requesting membership to NATO imminently, if not by the end of May. Russia have turned around and said that will be the end, or they will destroy Finland if that happens. Do you think peace in Europe, is that the end of it for now?
Well, it is certainly very far away, but I wish there would be more talk about it. And I'm glad you're talking about it here tonight, because Olaf Scholz is one of the few people who can talk to Putin and to Biden, of course, and so is the French president. We want these peace talks to succeed. We want a ceasefire. The best way to stop this killing is to have a ceasefire on both sides. And it seemed at one time that the gap between the two, Ukraine and Russia, on talks wasn't that big. Ukraine was saying we're willing to give up the ambition to join NATO. We'll be neutral instead. That's very much in line with what Putin has been saying. He's also talked about kicking into touch, if you like, the sovereignty issues over Crimea and eastern Ukraine, saying we can talk about that sometime during the next 15 years. So actually the gap is quite narrow. And I think it would be much better if people like Boris Johnson and Joe Biden would talk much more about peace and encourage the French and German presidents to really get the two sides talking to each other, or if not through mediation, to find out what the real differences between them are, which could be bridged.
Yeah, Piers, I mean, it is, the talk seems to be continually on more weapons, which in my mind, granted and admittedly as a non-foreign conflicts expert nonetheless, but to me, you're pumping weapons in, you're just extending, elongating this situation. I don't understand why more and more people are not focused on organising peace talks. Why isn't the objective, the loud objective, Zelensky, Putin in a room together to try and fix this?
Well, it looks as though Emmanuel Macron has been talking to Putin for quite a long time, quite regularly. Presumably he's trying to broker some sort of, some way of getting Putin to see sense. But the trouble with peace talks is we all want peace. We're in a very, very dangerous situation. This is unprecedented in my lifetime. You know, I don't remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, and I imagine that's the closest we got to it. But we are dealing with an extremely dangerous man in Vladimir Putin, and he's not going to give anything up unless he has to. So yes, let's do all we can to stop things escalating, but let's also do what we can to rescue the Ukrainians from the ghastly situation that they're in. And Putin's not going to be talked out of that. He has to be forced or threatened. Now, I don't know whether he can be. I mean, it's not a done deal at all, unfortunately, that Ukraine is going to win this war. They might win it in parts, not in other parts. It's a very dangerous situation. But yes, of course, peace, but you have to negotiate from strength, unfortunately.
Yeah. Peter, do you think the UK is doing enough? Did you see this kind of press conference today? Yet more money, yet more weapons, yet more sanctions?
Yes, I mean, I have been very impressed by Britain's response up till now, and indeed remains so. I was pleased to hear what Boris Johnson said today. I think that it shouldn't be, I mean, he sort of slightly framed it as though it was in response to the atrocities we've seen. I think it should be ongoing. I think it should intensify. When it comes to peace talks, fine. Who is not going to agree to peace talks? Of course. But the fact is that the war, as I can see it in Ukraine, is in fact entering a very important stage, a crucial stage. So we have got to do everything we can to help the Ukrainians hold the line. The only other thing I would say, by the way, is that the idea of peace talk and also some kind of, compromise, or whatever that might be, I think that when the Ukrainians see what the Russians have done during this war, they're less likely to feel like compromising, actually. And I think that we should be with them on that.
And Jonathan, we heard the news yesterday, I think it was, that Russia have now been kicked off the UN Human Rights Council. How significant is that? Is it relevant? Will it make any difference? Will Putin care in your mind?
Well, I think it's significant psychologically because it's a blow to Russia's international image that so many countries have voted first to condemn the invasion and secondly now to kick them off the UN Human Rights Council. But it won't change Putin's mind. I mean, sanctions are much more likely to change his mind than this kind of thing, which is more symbolic than substantive.
Yeah, and I mean, we say that sanctions, Piers, are likely to change his mind, but he doesn't seem to be changing his mind that much at all.
Well, we have to ask what the purpose of sanctions actually is. I mean, one idea that's been touted is that you make the Russian people suffer from these sanctions so that eventually they'll turn against their glorious leader. The evidence I'm aware of seems to be that Putin is, in fact, popular in Russia, and that if ordinary people are hurt by sanctions, they will see themselves and their regime as victimised and will support the regime even more. Yes. That leads to one great danger. The real point of sanctions must be to cripple the regime financially, and as part of a war effort, to stop them being able to use it on military equipment and on soldiers, and so all the things they need for their war machine. Gas seems to be an effective way to do that for two reasons. One is that we need to wean ourselves off gas anyway, in my opinion, though I know not everyone agrees with that. The other is that Russia is a major supplier of gas, and that if there's a concerted and coordinated effort to cut off to stop buying Russian gas, that could have an impact, if not on the morale, certainly on the capacity of the Russian regime. But I don't know whether it would be effective. It's just one idea among many that is being touted.
Peter, Clive just emailed in now saying, and I'll quote directly, Michelle, I'm not saying we shouldn't help countries or the people within them, but he asks, why can we always find the money to help them out over and over again when we have many of our own people living in poverty?
Well, in a way, you should be able to do both, I would say to that gentleman. I don't think it's a slightly false dichotomy in a way. But I think that the situation here, for me, is quite cut and dried, actually. And
what do you mean by that?
Well, a country has been the victim of an aggressor. No one, I think, doubts that. I mean, or at least there are some people, of course, who doubt it. But I mean, they're on the fringes, if you like. And it behoves us to actually help. And I think we have done that well. And when you look at, for example, and hear about, on an anecdotal basis, the stories of Ukrainians fighting, how pleased and grateful they are to Britain for helping, that is very good to hear. It's very good. But I think we should absolutely keep that up. And I think that there are other things where you could get money to help poor people here, in answer to your caller there. I think that there are many other ways one could get money to help people, which, come from different sources of waste, if you like.
Yeah, and Jonathan, I mean, all of this is kind of your area of expertise. Peter just saying, this is a very cut and dry, very, simple kind of simple situation, if you like, very clear cut. Do you agree with that?
Well, no, it's not at all clear cut. I think it's very complex and there are many different tendencies pushing in different directions. But I come back to my first point, which is the main thing is to stop the fighting. And that's not going to be done by putting pressure entirely on Putin. It means getting the peace talks going and finding what the real differences between them are. I mean, obviously, morally and psychologically, one feels one wants to help these people, but one also has to draw and keep in mind, are we escalating simply? Are we just prolonging the war? Will we make it more of a kind of stalemate, which both sides keep increasing their aggression on each other? I mean, not aggression by Ukraine, but their attacks on the Russian forces. And not ending the war at all. End the war is the crucial thing, because already a quarter of Ukraine's population is living outside either their country or their home altogether as homeless people. And more cities are going to be destroyed. There won't be anything to go back to for the refugees if and when the war does stop, if we go on escalating all the time and just keep the fighting at the boiling point.
Yes, but can I just come back to that? So, yes, you say that the main thing is to stop the fighting. Yes, that is true, but at what cost? You can't just sort of, when you say stop the fighting. Yes, we all want to stop the fighting. It's a very, admirable sentiment. But, at what cost and to whom? I mean, you can't... What would you accept if it meant stopping the fighting? What would you accept?
Well, I could ask the same question to you. What does it mean? At what cost to go on escalating, sending more weapons?
No, I would say... Why is it called escalating? Why is it called escalating when the Ukrainians, seems to me, have shown such extraordinary courage and resilience, right? And it seems to be unfailing. So we should support them in that.
Well, I think there's always been a moral argument for not fighting a war if you know you can't win it. A very difficult argument to swallow, actually, because it's part of just war tradition going back centuries. Because if you fight a war you can't win, then there's going to be a cost of lives. But there's also a principle of resisting aggression. And you can always end a war by just not fighting. And then the result is that you are then dominated by the person you're...
Well, of course, that's not even an option.
Well, I agree. I'm saying you can do it.
I mean, what, should we just have put down arms in 1940 or whatever?
That's just my point. Yeah.
Well, I tell you, I worry slightly, I've got to say, about the whole kind of Finland ambitions to join NATO and what the implications and ramifications of that will be.